Hello, world. You know today's guest well, and if you've been following Oktopost on social media, you know she's been up to incredible things here. Joining me today is our Vice President of Marketing, Natalie Binns. Natalie, it's great to have you back. Are you ready to get radically transparent with me today?
Always, Jen. I love being on this show.
We love having you. Now, listen, I've pulled you in because I've got a little bit of a bone to pick with you. And I thought instead of picking this bone one-on-one, right, why not get you on the podcast and pick it publicly? Right?
Okay, I'm rather nervous.
Hopefully, after I'll still be able to keep my job. So for anyone listening in, if you see a different host next week, you'll know what happened. I'm going to hop into why I've called you on this podcast. And I think the topic itself, I don't think is a surprise to anybody. And in fact, I think it dates back to way before, 2021, 2022. And it actually has yet to be resolved in many marketing circles and in many B2B organizations. So essentially what I'm looking to understand is, where should social media be sitting on the marketing team?
Oh, it's a good question. And I think, when we think about where social started, and, obviously back in the day, businesses, kind of saw that social media was taking off on a B2C perspective. Everybody had a MySpace account. I'm sure you did, Jen.
I did.
And then, obviously when kind of Facebook came out, that became the thing. And then LinkedIn, kind of kicked in. And it was really probably around the time that LinkedIn kind of took to the world, if you like, that businesses started to see that social media could be relevant for them. And I think, there's a lot of similarities to, the kind of evolution of websites. Back in the day, as websites became more prominent, it was a case of if you didn't have a website, that was a massive issue. And so with social media, it was a similar kind of thing, oh, you're not on Twitter, you're not on LinkedIn, like, who are you?
Right? Like, you don't have a LinkedIn page? Are you a real business? Right?
Absolutely, what's going on? And so, I think it started off with, well, everybody's got one, so we need to have one. And it seemed to be a brand exercise. So that kind of naturally sat with the marketing function. And I'm sure probably in the early days, websites started in the IT department from a company perspective and then gravitated towards marketing because it was seen as, the shop window, the kind of way that businesses were presenting themselves. And I think with social media, there's been quite the evolution there. And so, when you think about it, the amount of time that people are spending on social media now, the fact that we're in this always on world, and wherever you go, it's kind of blended. And when people started being able to access work email, business related content without needing a heavy laptop or a Wi-Fi connection, and Blackberries came out and everybody got excited about being able to get email on their phone, that really shifted and it really blurred the edges. I mean, I remember, very purposefully at the end of my day, finishing work, leaving my laptop at work because I didn't have Wi-Fi at home. I know, probably not the most secure thing. We used to lock them in our pedestal drawers at the end of the night and then come back the next morning. Working from home was just never happened. And I, have often thought during this pandemic, what would have happened economically worldwide, especially for companies, that are in the tech business or very tech reliant, had we been in that situation where so few households had anything other than a basic dial-up connection that was slow at best, and that's if they had Wi-Fi at home or any internet at home. And so a lot's changed. We're always on, we're always working, we're always kind of blending the personal and the the professional and social media, kind of social media channel, and be presented with content that relates to you as an individual as well as business. And so, you know, for marketers, you know, this has been something that they started with from a brand perspective. And, you know, it's kind of evolved. It's gone from, you know, we would share product updates, the odd blog, maybe a webinar and things like that. And probably not a huge amount of responses would come back from it. We might even do some paid ads with social, which we could see a lot more engagement and a lot more results just because of the very nature of it. But as we've started to see a shift where the buyers themselves have become much more internet savvy. The traditional model of a sales function has shifted massively in the last sort of 10 to 15 years. And it's gone from, you know, a traditional sales process to the buyer actually doing so much research way before they're ready to engage with a salesperson. And so, you know, because of that, we've really started to see that, you know, people want to ask questions, they want to absorb content, they want to engage with a brand before they're ready to speak to a salesperson and have a demo and go through all the steps. You know, and so the relationship from a brand to their prospective buyer has changed, and it started a lot earlier. Much earlier than it ever used to, because you're kind of taking them on a journey, and social media has been that big part that has taken individuals on a journey. We as buyers, we've got savvier. You know, we know the tricks. We know if we click on a link that somebody's going to track us. We know we're going to get stalked, you know, throughout the sales process. So we're a bit more cautious. Whereas, you know, with social media, it's more about being able to gather the information, start the relationship, and not necessarily be bombarded with sales activity when we're not ready.
Yep.
And we love salespeople, don't we, Jen? I mean, we love our sales guys, and we love salespeople that we engage with, you know, and we both used to be one, so you know we have to love salespeople.
It's our roots.
But at the same time, you know, in the same way as when you walk into a store and somebody's on you immediately before you've even had chance to browse the shelves, it's the same in B2B selling. You know, we need to take people on a journey and give them the information that they need. So, you know, in terms of where it should sit. Sorry, go on, Jen. Go ahead, Jen.
You bring up two interesting kind of in this kind of evolution of, you know, like the bone I have to pick, where should social media sit? Right. You bring two things that I want to focus on. The first thing you brought up was, hey, yeah, websites used to sit in IT and then somehow, you know, made their way over to marketing. And you brought up relationship building, which essentially usually lies when it comes to prospects with sales. So right there, you've named IT, you've named sales. You've also named that social used to at one point, right, make sense for it to be owned by brand, which essentially also I'm starting to like think like, okay, maybe PR as well, and kind of who in the marketing space owns it. But where I get stuck when I start thinking this through, right, if I'm looking as a head of social trying to plan out my next year, right, there's so many different requests coming from so many different departments, right? We didn't even talk yet about recruitment marketing, right, which is coming from HR. We didn't really talk about, you know, on the customer success side, right? You mentioned product, right? So that's, you know, the product team sending up, you know, updates about where and what's new inside of the product. So I'm going to ask, right, where should social media sit in the corporate organization? Because from what we see right now, it almost makes sense for it to sit everywhere because everybody has something that needs to go on it. So who needs to own that strategy?
It's a really good question. And I think the thing is that every business is different, and you're absolutely right. There are so many stakeholders that are interested in social media, in the same way as there's so many stakeholders interested in content for the website. You raised a really good point about HR. You know, recruiting is hard, promoting your company culture and showing, you know, the business as an authentic culture through social is key. And you know, there are so many areas within the business that would have a real important stake in this. And you know, that's often the challenge. You mentioned that there's people throwing content left, right, and center. There is a battle, you know, and this also kind of hits with, you know, and you know, people wanting to email the database of customers. You know, you've seen this time and time again, like everybody wants to mail the customers something, whether it's from HR, you know, or marketing or customer success or sales or whatever, you know, and there is almost this scramble as to, well, my stuff is more important than yours. And so I think, you know, it should be owned by everybody in the business, but like anything, you always have to have a single owner to manage the strategy, to prioritize, and also to kind of have a single voice, because as we know, the way in which different departments see content and information is slightly different. And what you don't want is potentially a kind of a voice that is very mixed, a bit of a split personality, if you like, in the way that you're presenting the business. On one hand, it may be very technical and very formal, and on the other hand, it may be, you know, very happy-go-lucky and kind of, you know, positive employment focus. And so, you know, it's really important to have a single owner. And I think, you know, you mentioned, you know, sales having a big stake in this, and I think what really is valuable in any business is that you understand the differences within, you know, when we talk about where should social media sit, we really want to talk about who is owning, using the channels to promote the content, collating all the information from the different departments and presenting that in a uniform and engaging way. And then aside from that, you've got the kind of massive part of social media that businesses are starting to get into. And, you know, a lot of our customers are doing this and doing this very well on employer branding and employee advocacy. And so when we think about who should own social, everyone should own social, especially when it comes to advocacy, because actually, as we know, you know, there is the brand and how you present yourselves as an organization, and that has value and that has engagement, and, you know, businesses promoting themselves, you know, to buyers, you know, that they will look at that content. But what's really going to create the relationship is people-based. It's one-to-one. You're not necessarily going to engage with a brand in the same way as you'll engage with an individual that is a brand ambassador, somebody that works for the company, which is why that advocacy is so important. So if we can separate the two, when we think about ownership, if we're talking about where the ownership of the, you know, outbound strategy for social and your social channel should sit, you know, that should really, in my opinion, sit within marketing, because marketing typically owns the brand. And typically has a real customer focus, has a real understanding of the business needs, department to department, and they're often numbers driven. But in terms of the advocacy side of the business, this is where everyone should own it. And, you know, traditionally what we've seen is marketing have always been great at social. They always want to give their company some love. It helps them hit their numbers. Sales have traditionally been pretty good at this as well. And as social selling kicked in, they've become a lot more savvy. And, you know, when I think about it, there's been multiple times in my career where I've been asked to go and sit with sales and run training sessions on how to set up a social media account, how to set up a Twitter account, how to tweet, how to set up their LinkedIn profile. And even today, you know, there are still learnings to be had in terms of how you present your profile. But it's been a while since I've had to run a training session on how to use social media. It's become inherent to everyone in the business. But I think beyond sales and marketing, we're really starting to see other people's networks be so vital. You know, C-level execs, essential. You know, what you see from your CEO, your chief product officer, you know, your kind of GMs in regions, their engagement and their network is so important in promoting the brand and the things that you're trying to share. So we're getting there, I think.
We're getting there. I just kind of, to summarize that up, because I think you've kind of called out a few key things. And I recently read, I think it was a Forrester report that kind of made a similar statement, but you basically called out, right, that no matter where social media is actually sitting, which, we can agree it sits in marketing for the sake of this podcast, that the role of social media does in fact require cross-functional interlock, right? And it's sharing and collaboration. And even though it's owned by the marketing function, it's only going to be as successful as everybody contributing to it, which still doesn't answer my question, right? Because it's frustrating. So, just to kind of get inside of my head where I'm at right now, I'm thinking, okay, so we know that everybody needs to own it. We know employee advocacy is important. We know that social sits everywhere. But if marketing is now owning it, and we look inside of a marketing function, right? And usually we see, the classic departments inside of marketing, which are PR and content and demand generation and, the corporate brand. And I think branding keeps coming up a lot in this show. Right? Those are 4 key areas. So do you, who in the marketing function then should your social media manager report to, and where should their focus be? And for anyone listening, I know I've been having some really interesting conversations with CMOs and VPs who are looking to hire either their first ever full-time, right, social media manager, because their social has finally gotten to a point where it's seen as valuable to the organization and they're investing in their strategy more. So they're hiring their first full-time employee. Or if they're looking to reconstruct their team because they're second guessing, hey, our social person's sitting in PR, but you know what? Maybe we shouldn't just be a PR tank in our feed and we should get a little more interesting. So where exactly in the marketing function do we put our social media managers?
So again, it did start very much in the kind of PR and corporate marketing or corporate communications. And, in a lot of organizations that I've worked in, there's been that, evolution where anything press related, social was a way of amplifying the message. And so often, the PR team have kind of owned social and often outsourced it. Before being able to hire people internally. And I think, when you look at how that function is often measured, it is about brand, reputation, awareness. And that certainly served a purpose, and it has done. But I think as we've gone, and obviously the smaller the organization, if you don't necessarily have a dedicated resource, often it's a bit of a hot potato.
And nobody really wants to hold.
Exactly, because everybody knows what social media is all about, but they also know to do it well. It really requires thought and effort. It's not something that you can kind of go, oh, that'll do. Because otherwise you're just creating noise for no reason, and there's no real value. And I think as marketing leaders and as marketers, we're always thinking about, why are we doing this? There's 1,000 things we can be doing as marketers. Why are we doing this particular thing versus something else? What value is this bringing for us? And I think so it has been a bit of a hot potato. I think PR ended up owning it just organically because of the reach and amplifying the brand and promoting the organization. What's really shifted is that things have got way more sophisticated. We've become pickier as individuals on social. So we're so used to seeing high volumes of information now. Even ads that we used to see on a website are kind of blended into the background. We've become desensitized to marketing messages. We can see a pop-up from miles away. We can spot it and close it before it's even had chance to, kind of give us any information. We're very smart like that. And that's just because we've done it so much. And I think, as marketers, we're starting to see that with social, we can do a lot more with it. Our content needs to be great. We can get good engagement. Like anything else that we do in marketing, it's often experimental. It's often, testing and playing with different things. And there's not always a logical reason as to why something performs over something that doesn't. Often you'll see, marketers going to agencies or whatever, or speaking to their social media man. I want this to go viral. I follow quite a few social media accounts of individuals and customers, and they're often joking about the fact that, they're asked to do the impossible. Like, how do you know something's going to go viral? You don't. And so, what's changed is it's gone from being, oh, just do this, it's part of the process, and it's not necessarily measured. It's, we might have measured on the number of followers that we've got, the percentage increase. But as you and I know, Jen, that's great, but it doesn't tell us anything, really. Because you can have all these followers, but with the clever algorithms that you have for the different channels, we know you're not going to share your content with all those followers because, unless they're engaging with you, it's not necessarily going to come up on their feed.
Right.
And
right.
so
no, it's stressful. And I'm just thinking out loud, right? One of the things I constantly look at when it comes to social, right? And I think, here at Oktopost, it's living currently under content, and we'll get into that in a moment. But what I'm constantly looking at is how are the engagements juxtaposed next to our net new growth of followers, right? Because, and that's personally what I look at, because to me, it's like, if you're growing your channels and your impressions are growing and you see net new followers coming in, but your engagement's stagnant or going downward, that's not really a good thing, because the whole point of social is to be social. So it's, you're always checking your ebbs and flows and trying to figure out, okay, I see we're growing in followers, but we're going down in engagements. And then you see you're going up in engagements, but then suddenly your followers are stagnant. So that's kind of what I'm focused on as somebody who's living and breathing inside of the social realm. But again, that's like from a content, I think, perspective, because what I'm seeing driving it is, the written word and how things are being said and positioned. But then I take a look at demand gen, right? We work closely with the demand gen team, and, marketers, we sit under, the revenue umbrella. So I know everything that I'm doing also needs to get leads to some degree, right? Like, great, you have 500 likes on a post. Well, that doesn't mean anything. But then you start looking deeper, and out of those 500 likes, have any of them become customers or into the sales cycle or wherever it may be? So then it kind of, does it sit between content and demand gen? So I'm wondering, on your side, kind of from leadership level or exec level, any advice? Because I think we're all curious, right? Like, is that the right place for it to be sitting? Do we test that? Can we test that? Should we move it? Does it depend on size?
I think, often it is going to come to, it depends. You raise a good point. In our organization, it sits under content. And one of the main reasons behind that is, content is the driver. And we have noticed that what is helping us as B2B organizations is to emulate what B2C organizations are doing and focus on the individual and be more personable, be more human, be more authentic. And that makes a massive difference. And I've spoken to a number of influencers, and actually our very own Olivia is an influencer in her spare time when she's not, managing our social media and our advocacy programs. And it comes down to, how, I've asked the question, how did you grow to 10,000 followers from, like, in a year or in 3 months or whatever? How did you do that without sending out bribes or buying followers and things like that you can do these days?
Send in the bots.
Absolutely. But the answer I've got back from multiple individuals is, it's all about content. It's all about great content. Because if you're not putting out great content, it's kind of irrelevant. And that talks to your point of, it's great if you're growing your followers and your reach and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the engagement. And if you don't focus on the content, then it's just noise. Then you're just pushing stuff out for pushing's sake. And when we talk about demand gen, a lot of organizations, a lot of our customers are very growth driven. You know, there is a huge request to kind of grow the customer base. We also have a lot of people that we engage with where customer experience is one of their high priorities. And as we know, and we probably have all done this, where we've kind of put out a social media message to a brand that either are not answering the phone or not responding to as well. You know, social can often be a way to vent as well as to kind of provide positive feedback and gather information. And so, you know, when I think about it, you know, demand gen has a huge component in this, but where demand gen have not really been that bothered about social media apart from paid in the past was because there was no way of tracking the information. There was no real way of saying, well, what's the value? So with paid, I can track that within an inch of its life. I can run UTM trackers. I can see everything that's happened from the beginning right the way through, take it through my CRM system and equate it to close one business. That's something I can hang my hat on and apply to my goals. Okay, if I can't measure it, well, I'm not interested. I don't have time for that. But as somebody that, you know, for me, coming from the demand gen side of marketing and originally sales and being very numbers driven, you know, I've often been conflicted with the fact that we've often separated organic with paid. So again, we've had that kind of weird split personality where we've not been communicating with corporate marketing on the campaigns or the messages or the way we communicate, the style of language, the imagery. So the two have not married up in any way. And so that's become a challenge. But now that we can measure, now that we've got the ability to show where people are engaging with us from a very early part of the sales process, before they've even hit your website, before they've downloaded a piece of content, that's the interesting thing. That's the bit where we're starting to learn more about the customer. And so I think demand gen folks, growth folks, they are definitely going to be much more interested in it now. And where demand gen is split out from content, you know, there is that becomes a, well, is it the numbers side of things or is it actually the content? And I think, you know, for us, it's always going to come down to the best content. We've got a great content team. Well, you know this, Jen, you're part of it. And
I did not pay her to say it.
No, definitely not. But you know, what I have always, you know, heard from you when you push back on me, you're always saying, Natalie, it's about the content. We've got to make sure that this is something that people want to hear, read, engage with. This, how is this helping me as a social media manager, as a marketing leader? How is this giving me something that is going to be useful, actionable tips, something that I can start using straight away, or something that's going to make me think? And I think that's what it's always going to come down to for us. Now, obviously, every company is different, as I said earlier, when it comes to the customer experience driven kind of brand, or whether you're growth focused, that will often determine where it sits. But for me, if you've got a real drive on the content, the other departments need to have a stake in that, and they need to care about it, and they need to be aware about it as to what they can get from social media and how it can help them. But for me, I'm always going to say content, because content is key.
I love that. So just to wrap up, and, you know, thank you for letting me pick this bone, because, you know, it's on my mind, but it's, you know, I think to end the show, right, we're hearing that 2022, in Natalie's opinion, which I think is a pretty good one, social media should certainly, we can all agree, be sitting in marketing, and should be sitting in marketing. And content is a strong contender of where and who should own the social media strategy, where the social media manager should report into. And they're the ones that are going to be pretty much taking a look at every single department, what content is coming in, and which pieces of those content get priority to the social channels. Did I hear that right?
Absolutely. You know, with that noise that we talked about earlier, the content team are really focused on, you know, what's right, what is right in terms of the audience. Who is the audience and what do they care about? And so whether it's a social selling message, whether it's a employee advocacy, whether it's a culture, whether you're trying to, drive recruitment, whether you're trying to promote product enhancements, create a great customer experience, whatever your social goals, the content is going to be the thing that drives it. And as our content teams become more mature and more results driven and numbers focused, they can learn from what's working and what's not working through metrics, as well as being able to kind of see the content as well. But by being thoroughly focused on the content, they're not just providing the business with the goals, but they're going to show that growth because of the engagement and the direct relationship they're building with social media users and their buyers and customers.
Boom. If this mic wasn't so expensive, I would absolutely because I think that's exactly what needs to be said. So with that, Natalie, thank you so much, but I wouldn't let you off the show with one question as a curveball. This wouldn't be radically transparent if it wasn't.
Okay.
So what I want to know, right, is, we know you mentioned in the beginning of the episode, you're sitting in, the UK. What is your most favorite December holiday tradition that you have?
So many. This is my favorite time of year. So much going on, lots of lights, hot chocolates, lovely things. A while ago, probably about 15 years ago, I started collecting Christmas decorations wherever I traveled. And they would go on my tree. So I had like a little Eiffel Tower that I got in Paris, and I got the Sydney Opera House when I went to Sydney, and people buy them for me as well. And what's really exciting is when I get them out once a year and I hang them on my tree, and I remember where I was or what I was doing, and friends often get me them as well, wherever they go. And actually, there's a bit of a tradition where a very good friend of mine, who was also a podcast guest a while ago, Larissa Gaston from Exabeam, she often sends me a decoration. We usually swap them in person, but because of the pandemic, we haven't seen each other for a little while. And she sent me a fabulous one from her trip to Mexico. Winging its way to her at the moment is one that I've sent her. So it's really getting them out and just kind of reflecting on, the memories that I have over the years. And so it's pretty festive because it's all about putting things on the tree, but it's also kind of reflecting and thinking back to experiences I've had. And I just really love to do that.
So with that, anyone listening in, if you want to continue the conversation, you can feel free to reach out to marketing@oktopost.com, and anyone from the marketing team, we'd be happy to continue this discussion on social, on any aspect. And we look forward to greeting everybody in 2022. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast, brought to you by Oktopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Oktopost. And if you loved today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Oktopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.oktopost.com. Until next time.